Okay, picture this. You're sitting in a classroom, you crack open a heavy textbook, and you just kind of accept whatever's printed on the page as absolute, undisputed truth. Right? We all do it. But how often do we actually stop and ask, wait, who wrote this truth? Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating intersection in sociology. We're going to look at how researchers investigate the very foundations of our education system. We'll be unpacking the methods sociologists use to study public documents, specifically how they analyze something as massive and honestly as influential as the national curriculum. So if you've ever wondered how educational policies get scrutinized by social scientists, well, you're absolutely in the right place. So who really decides what we learn? It's incredibly easy to assume that the subjects we study, history, literature, the sciences, are just these universal facts, almost like they were handed down by nature. But the reality? Education is curated. The curriculum is a highly specific selection of knowledge. And that brings up the big question. Who's making that selection? What values, priorities, or even hidden biases might be lurking inside those choices? To figure this out, sociologists don't just sit back and guess. No way. They use rigorous research methods to analyze the exact documents that govern our schools.
Here's our agenda for today. We're going to cover the ethnocentric curriculum, Ball's concept of Little Englandism, researching via public documents, practical and ethical factors, and finally, theoretical pros and cons. Let's jump in.
Section 1. The ethnocentric curriculum. Okay, so before a sociologist even glances at a public document, they usually have a specific puzzle or pattern they're trying to solve. In education, one of the most heavily researched areas is this concept of the ethnocentric curriculum. What exactly is that? Well, simply put, it's a curriculum that reflects the culture of just one specific ethnic group, usually the dominant culture in that society. Think about what this looks like on the ground. Imagine a whole school year revolving entirely around the holidays, the literature, and the historical victories of just one specific culture, while basically ignoring the contributions of everybody else. What's really fascinating and crucial here is the implication. Some sociologists point to this ethnocentric curriculum as a textbook example of institutional racism. We're talking about an inequality so deeply baked into the system that people might not even consciously notice it anymore. It's this idea that the education system itself is structurally wired to validate the dominant culture while slowly alienating everyone else. Section 2. Ball's Little Englandism. So how does this theory actually play out in the real world? Well, this brings us to the work of sociologist Stephen Ball. He took a really hard look at the UK's education system and coined a massive term in the field, Little Englandism. Ball argued that the national curriculum is just intensely focused on middle-class white British culture. Based on his analysis, the curriculum effectively ignores Black and Asian history, basically pushing minority ethnic cultures to the margins of the classroom. And this sociological argument is profoundly important. Think about why this matters. If a student goes to school day in and day out and literally never sees their own heritage or history reflected in the textbooks they're graded on, that can lead to a severe sense of marginalization. It can cause a student to just mentally check out of the learning process entirely. And sociologists suggest this drop in self-esteem can directly and negatively impact their overall educational achievement. But here's the kicker, and this is exactly where the sociological detective work begins. How do researchers like Ball actually prove this? I mean, they can't just make a sweeping claim about Little Englandism based on a hunch, right? They need hard empirical data. They need a rock-solid research method. And when you want to study the overarching rules dictating what every single state school in an entire country must teach, well, you have to look at the official rulebook itself. Which brings us to Section 3, Researching via Public Documents. Whenever sociologists want to study the state or major institutions, they follow the paper trail. Public documents are exactly what they sound like. They're official government or institutional records released for public consumption. We're talking about government white papers, the national curriculum itself, and institutional reports, like Ofsted reports over in the UK. Now, if you aren't familiar, Ofsted is the government body that actually conducts official school inspections. They grade a school's performance, essentially setting the gold standard for what a good education looks like. These aren't just admin checklists. They are the official public documents that dictate the educational priorities for the entire state. You can kind of think of public documents as the ultimate societal notepad. Researchers aren't just reading the literal words printed on the page. They are reading between the lines. They use methods like content analysis to hunt down the unwritten rules and values of a society. By heavily analyzing something like a national curriculum,
Researchers are trying to decode what sociologists call the ideological state apparatus. I know, that sounds like a mouthful, but it's basically just the invisible framework a government uses to pass down its specific values to the next generation, without actually using force. Researchers are digging through these documents to uncover whose culture is intentionally being put on a pedestal and whose culture is quietly being left out. Moving on to Section 4, Practical and Ethical Factors. So, is digging through public documents actually a good way to do research? In sociology, we evaluate research methods using the PET framework. That stands for practical, ethical, and theoretical factors. Let's start with the P and the E. On the practical side, analyzing public documents is incredibly cheap and highly accessible. You don't need to fund some massive laboratory or pay hundreds of participants for their time. The documents are often just sitting there online for free, or you can request them under the Freedom of Information, or FOI Act. But what's really amazing is the massive advantage on the ethical side. Because you are exclusively studying pieces of paper and not interacting with people, there are practically zero ethical hurdles. This is a game changer. Think about it. Interviewing schoolchildren directly about race and marginalization, that requires massive ethical oversight, parental consent, strict safeguarding. It's a lot. But when you're just analyzing a published document, there's absolutely no invasion of privacy and no risk of harming human participants. However, there is a catch. Actually, a pretty big one. While this method might be cheap and ethically completely safe, it isn't always fast. A major practical limitation is time, specifically dealing with government bureaucracy. If the document you need isn't already slapped on a website somewhere, you have to formally submit a Freedom of Information Act request. And if you've ever dealt with government red tape, you know exactly how frustrating that can be. Navigating that bureaucracy can take weeks, months, or sometimes literally years, as agencies review what they can legally release. If a researcher is on a strict grant deadline, waiting for a government department to finally email over a document can seriously stall or even completely kill their entire project.
Finally, Section 5, Theoretical Pros and Cons.
We've saved the trickiest part for last, the T in our PET framework, the theory. This deals with the actual quality and nature of the data the researcher gets. Is it valid? Is it reliable? To truly grasp the theoretical value of public documents, we have to carefully weigh their strengths against their limitations. Because while these documents provide unparalleled access into the inner workings of a government, they are definitely not perfect, objective mirrors of reality. Let's look at the theoretical strengths first. Public documents provide incredibly in-depth data. If you want to understand the true priorities of an institution, analyzing their own official reports gives you a really deep, qualitative look into their mindset. This is particularly valuable for what we call an interpretivist sociologist. An interpretivist is a researcher who cares a lot less about raw numbers and bar charts and a lot more about uncovering the deeper, hidden meanings and human motives behind social policies. For that kind of researcher, digging into the rich, complex text of a national curriculum offers a level of depth you simply cannot get from staring at a spreadsheet of national exam scores. But on the flip side, there are some pretty severe theoretical limitations to consider. Public documents are notoriously unreliable because they are wide open to subjective interpretation. For example, when Stephen Ball reads the national curriculum, he sees clear-cut evidence of Little Englandism. But another sociologist, they could read that exact same document and see a completely fair, well-rounded traditional education. Furthermore, these documents are highly subject to researcher bias. We have to remember that a school curriculum isn't just handed down by nature. It's debated, drafted, and written by politicians who need to win elections and appease their voter base. That means a government report or a curriculum isn't some neutral, undisputed fact. It inherently reflects a specific political agenda and worldview, rather than pure objective truth. So, let's look at the journey we've taken today. We started with a very real feeling of marginalization in the classroom, connected it to Stephen Ball's sociological theory of Little Englandism, and learned how researchers actually prove these concepts by navigating the practical, ethical, and theoretical maze of public documents. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to reflect on. How has your own education been shaped by the public documents that govern it? Think about the textbooks you read and the history you were taught. Whose story was being prioritized and whose was left on the cutting room floor? The answer isn't a secret. It's sitting right there in the paperwork. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the world around you, and I'll see you next time.